what happened in New York City back in the 90s with Rudy Giuliani, where he instituted this, what they called the broken window policy, where you get they had turned a blind eye, law enforcement had, to, petty thief, to too much whiskey. My mouth is moving faster than my mind again.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hi, folks. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 237, and we're joined once again, finally back from the land of the dead, Pastor John Bennett. Pastor, welcome back.
Thank you, Lloyd. Turns out I am too American for the Chinese communist coronavirus to take me down, so...
Recovered and back better than ever, right?
I don't know about better than ever. Still got this stupid cough that doesn't quite want to go away, but better than I was 3 weeks ago.
Absolutely. Well, we've been praying for your recovery, and we're glad that I'm certainly glad you're back. It's great to have you back and to be with you.
Much appreciated. I'm glad to be back.
Today we're playing a little game I guess we could call, what gun law would have prevented this? So while you think about what that might mean, I'm going to thank the men and women who made this show possible, the men and women who are members of the Reformation Gun Club. And today specifically, I'd like to thank John from Wheaton, Illinois, Catherine, Mark from St. Paul, Sue from Conover, Dallas from Severance, Colorado, our friend Dan from Enumclaw, Washington, and another Dan, Daniel from Chehalis, Washington. Thank you all so much for your support. Armed Lutheran Radio is a listener-funded podcast, and that means we don't have any sponsors, we don't have any advertising. We rely on the generosity of the members of the Reformation Gun Club to help us keep the lights on. Members get early access to the show each week, some cool swag, and hundreds of hours of exclusive content, new content released every week for members. We've got a new website as well, and monthly online hangouts, and the next one coming up soon. We didn't get to do September because of all the craziness with my house, and back in the home studio this week, so we'll be starting up the monthly online hangouts probably next weekend would be my guess, or perhaps the week after, since Pastor, I think you're going to be out of town, so I would enjoy having you there for that as well. So, folks, if you want to come and visit with the cast and other members and take advantage of all these awesome benefits, or just check it out and see what it's all about, visit armedlutheran.us/gun club, or look for a link in the show notes for this or any of our previous episodes. All right. So what are we doing? As we all know, politicians are keen to blame guns for the violence in our major cities and around the country. Every time somebody does something stupid with a gun, the automatic response from the media and from politicians is gun control. But the response that we have on the Pro 2A side is typically not, it's less than optimal, shall we say. It's typically slogans about rights and shall not be infringed, which are great on their face, but they're not really persuasive.
No, they're not.
And you have an excellent article in the, I'm going to shamelessly plug the new book that's coming out here soon. You have an introductory, the very first chapter is your article on biblical gun rights advocacy. And one of the things you talk about is making persuasive arguments.
Absolutely. That's what we have to do. And the problem so often, as you mentioned, with our advocacy is that, or I shouldn't say our advocacy, but the pro-Second Amendment community in general, is that so much of the emphasis is upon my rights. This is what the Constitution says. Well, the problem is you're dealing with a bunch of radical leftists who believe that the Constitution is immaterial to the discussion on gun rights. And we need to make an emotional appeal. The example of Carol Bone is perfect. That this is a young woman who was stabbed to death by her ex because New Jersey, the local law enforcement office would not issue her a permit to purchase a firearm. It had been in the waiting period for beyond what I believe the law stipulated at that point.
Like 45 days or something.
It was,
at that point?
ridiculous. That to bring up the stories of those who have perished because their Second Amendment liberty was infringed upon by a local or state jurisdiction. That's where we work the argument to make an emotional connection and an emotional appeal to people. You know, the lives of those who have been lost because they were denied the ability to protect themselves with lethal force. That's what we have to focus on.
Absolutely. And the to be charitable as well to those who were trying to make these arguments to, there are some among them, not just the radical leftists, but there's unfortunately a large percentage of of people who come out of the public school system are simply unaware of what it is the Constitution actually says. So there are a good number who are simply uninformed, and so you have to make these arguments from real life situations that appeal both to emotion and to logic. You can't lean completely on logic, and you can't go to the rights argument or the constitutional argument, because those are generally not persuasive when you're talking about the uninformed or the anti-gun people. So I thought this week would be constructive for us to look at some real-life examples and ask ourselves what could have been done to prevent these tragedies and what gun laws did or didn't do in each of these cases. So our first one comes to, no surprise at all, comes from Chicago. 17-year-old activist Caleb Reed was shot to death by a friend who was aiming at a passing car, prosecutors now say. Now, this is a crazy story. The initial story of Caleb Reed's tragic death was tragic enough. A 17-year-old activist with a bright future killed on a West Rogers Park sidewalk when someone shot from a passing car. Now, this is what they thought initially. But a month later, as prosecutors brought charges in the case, a more devastating narrative emerged. Reed was actually killed by his own friend who shot blindly at a car down the street.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the Chicago Tribune completely screws up the headline by saying that he was aiming at a passing car. There was no aiming involved.
That's very charitable. That is absolutely... that's putting more than the best construction on it, I think. Because video shows, I'm not sure how to pronounce this young man's name, Genove Martin. I'm sorry, you'll have to ask his mom. I don't really know how this is pronounced. Age 18, kind of fired over his shoulder at a Chevy Malibu about 3 houses down. But Reed was right behind him when he fired, and the bullet struck him in the forehead. Martin was college-bound, this is the shooter, involved in mentoring and community service, and had himself been shot just last year, according to his attorney. He was arrested Sunday morning, according to Chicago police. This, I think, was last week or the week before. Murder charges are commonly brought in fatal shootings when a gunman kills an unintended target. Prosecutors do not have to prove that Martin shot his friend on purpose, only that he meant to kill someone else or knew that he likely could have killed someone else by firing the gun. Reed, and this is really tragic, a leader of a group called Voices of Youth in Chicago Education, which is a coalition of community organizations advocating for racial justice in the education system. Members said they saw Reed as an activist full of potential, always pushing himself and others to work harder. He was walking with Martin and 2 other friends on the afternoon of July 31st when a gray Chevy Malibu passed them in the opposite direction. Reed was at the back of the group. Martin looked over his shoulder to eye the Malibu as it drove off, and the Malibu stopped. Martin reached into his pocket, pulled out a gun, and shot towards the car, then kept firing as his friends ran towards him. I don't know why they were running towards him. As Martin took off running, he fired one last time over his shoulder, and that was the shot that struck Reed and killed him. Only then did the vehicle that he was shooting at start shooting at him. So, and the first thing that jumped out at me here was this constant narrative that we hear from brainiacs like LeBron James and the leftist media that blacks live in constant fear of being shot by racist cops, that they're being hunted willy-nilly. But the truth is, unfortunately, that they're far more likely to die like this in utterly stupid tragedies than they are to be killed by police.
Right. And, here's the thing. It didn't say what kind of firearm was used. I can only guess it was a handgun.
If he pulled it out of his pocket, I'm going to, unless he's got really deep pockets.
Well, and he's 18, and lawfully you cannot purchase or own a handgun until you are 21.
And that is a tremendous point because the article, as like you said, being charitable with the aiming part in the headline, never mentions the fact that this gun was more than likely, I think it's probably definitively carried illegally.
Yes.
We're talking about Chicago, after all. We're talking about Illinois, where you cannot get, you're not supposed to, and well from your own experience, you can't even own ammunition or possess ammunition without a FOID card, and a FOID card can't be issued to someone under 21, as I understand it. Is that correct?
I think you can get a FOID card for a long gun if you're 18 or older, unless they've changed the laws. But yeah, for a handgun, I believe the national law is 21.
So it could have been one of these Bugs Bunny things where he just pulls it out of, it just keeps coming up out of his pants.
Right.
But I'm going to, I think you're right, I think we're safe in assuming here that he was violating the law by carrying a gun, even if it was a long gun. The article says he pulled the gun out of his pocket, so he was concealing it.
Right.
So there's no way in hell an 18-year-old in Illinois, in Chicago, is going to be getting a permit to carry a concealed firearm.
Right. And unless it was like that, you've seen that stupid urban carry holster that can, where you got guys shoving shotguns down their drawers.
Or you just pull the thing and it comes up out of your pants.
Although, I see the ads for their newest model actually has a retention clip in there. So at least they're, so it's only, 75% derp instead of 100% now.
Right. And so here's a quote from, I think this was the judge in the case. He's so concerned he shoots his own friend while trying to shoot at the other car. His lawyer tells me he's on his way. He was on his way to college. Had he made it, he could have changed his life. I typically don't get this kind of young man charged for this kind of offense in front of me. I'm just stunned. So here's a kid who, and this is another narrative buster, where we're told that, because in the very next paragraph, they talk about how Reed and the shooter were both participants in this academic and character development program in school. You remember, and that made me think about, what was it, back in the 90s when Clinton was doing the midnight basketball thing and was trying to push for that this was a way to keep kids out of, to teach them some character education, keep them out of trouble with gangs.
Obviously, this isn't working.
It's not working. Because this kid's a mentor, we're told. He's college bound. He's should have learned from a previous experience a year previous, that after being a victim of gun violence, and here he is still carrying a firearm. So what do we make of this? Obviously the law didn't help. What went wrong here?
Well, the truth of the matter is that before this incident, it's obvious that he had already engaged in criminal activity because as someone who is 18 years old, he cannot lawfully acquire a handgun. There just is no way. So the only way he would have been in possession of it in the first place would have been for multiple laws to have been committed, both in acquiring the firearm, in carrying the firearm, and in discharging the firearm.
Right. Concealing it as well.
Yeah, and concealing it as well. And there is a car that passes by and it's 3 blocks away, and you just start shooting at it. What the hell is wrong with you?
So it's potentially, I think, safe to assume that this young man was probably involved in some sort of nefarious activity, that he would have seen this car and thought this was a threat. Why would you see a car drive past and think it was a threat if they're not, if you don't have some experience in that, in those circles, in that kind of, in that world? I think we've got a kid who, as it's not mentioned in the article about his family life, but you have to wonder what kind of guidance, what kind of mentoring was he getting at home? What kind of family situation did he come out of?
Yeah, there's, and I don't want to jump to conclusions here. It's kind of hard not to, but I would be willing to bet my lunch money that he came from a home where there was no positive male role model in the home.
And sadly, that is all too often true in inner city or urban communities. And I don't want to get out on this. I don't want to make too much of the whole the black thing, because it's not a black thing. It is a family dynamic thing. And
yes.
if you grow up surrounded by negative influences or without positive influences, then you look for positive influences in places that are not so positive.
Right.
And the reinforcement that typically these kids get is not good. And so obviously, if this kid thought, plus we live in a culture that keeps telling young men through movies and music and television that the way that we solve problems is with firearms or with violence, and there's nobody at home to teach him otherwise. The problem is that it's not gun laws that are the solution. It's not gun laws that are, or a lax gun laws that are the problem. The problem is that society has changed to a point where our young people are not being pointed in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And and as I read the article and talks about the character of this young man who was shot, it's also a good reminder. I mean, even if, a child comes from a single mother home, the importance of impressing upon your children the importance of picking decent friends. I would guess, and of course I'm jumping to conclusions here, forgive me, but I would guess if this was a close friend of his that he'd been hanging out with, that he knew that he was the kind of kid who carried a gun. Usually kids that age, they brag about that kind of thing. It's, how many times have you heard of stories of these gangbangers who get arrested for murder, where they're shown in pictures brandishing firearms and wads of cash on Facebook. So it happens, and it's know who your kids are hanging out with.
This paragraph really hit me. Reed was killed on the last day of the most violent month in Chicago in 28 years. At least 107 people were killed in July alone, more than double the same month last year. That's the most homicides in the city in a single month since September of 1992. So clearly, and we're talking about a city that has tremendously strict gun laws. And yet we see this month after month after month. So clearly, gun laws are not the answer.
No. I mean, if they were, Chicago should be a utopia.
Right.
But it's not. It's a hellhole. Yeah.
Here's another story. This one's even more bizarre. Detroit teen charged with killing man he thought cut in line at a haunted house. A Detroit teenager has been charged with fatally shooting a man that he accused of cutting the line at a haunted house in Michigan. Damon Parker Terrell, age 17, was busted Saturday in the September 27th murder of a 29-year-old Detroit man he thought jumped in line in front of him outside of a haunted house in Pontiac. Terrell, who has no known prior criminal record, was taken into custody in Michigan near the Indiana border without incident, busting the narrative that every time you have a black suspect, they end up being killed by police. But we'll leave that for now. The teen was arraigned later Saturday on charges including first-degree murder, possession of a firearm in the commission of a felony, and carrying a concealed weapon. Well, never mind the fact that he's a teen carrying a handgun. The judge ordered him held without bail. 2 days earlier, a $2,000 reward was announced as Terrell was named as a suspect in the fatal shooting, where the victim, identified as Douglas Reese, and his girlfriend told deputies a man in front of them would not move while waiting in line. The victim and the suspect exchanged words as the suspect thought the victim had cut in line ahead of him. According to deputies, the suspect and the victim went separately to the parking lot, where witnesses then reported hearing shots fired outside the attraction. And Reese was found shot in the side, the neck, and the chest before a blue sedan sped off. That would have been Terrell driving away. So here's a kid who has no prior criminal record. And this busts the narrative, of course, there's something that we talk about a lot on the show, is how oftentimes the kids who are, or the criminals who are involved in this kind of violent behavior, they've got long criminal records, right? And you've talked about the broken window policy and how, you find out that the kids are the criminals who are committing the minor crimes are also committing these major crimes somewhere along the way. Well, here's a kid who has absolutely no prior criminal record.
Right. Well, and this is where I have to play devil's advocate and say that just because no one has ever been charged with anything doesn't mean they've never committed a crime.
Just means they hadn't been caught.
Just means they haven't been caught. Yes.
And
yes.
to be honest, all criminals have to start somewhere, so there has to be a first time for everything, right?
Right. And I mean, his first, you just didn't jump right into shooting people who cut in line for your very first criminal offense.
Right.
It's who knows what other crimes this person has been involved in. Obviously, the crime of unlawfully carrying and concealing a firearm.
Mm-hmm. This young man is even younger than the one in the shooter in the previous story. 17 years old. So there's not even, you can't even possess a long gun in Michigan at 17. So this guy is clearly breaking the law. Who knows how long he's been doing it? And like you said, who knows what else he's been involved in. So again, we're talking about a young man in a city with very strict gun control, in a Democrat-run city, a Democrat-run state, carrying a gun illegally. Again, the issue's not the gun.
Right.
There's a lesson here, I think, for us. Let's take the fact that he's carrying the firearm illegally, take the fact that he's 17 out of this equation, and somebody cuts in line in front of you at an attraction like an amusement park or a haunted house. The way you settle that kind of dispute, it's not by going fisticuffs with somebody or pulling a gun on them.
Right. It's, pardon me, I was in line ahead of you. Did you not see me standing here? And it's like, well, the guy wants to be a jerk about it. Doesn't mean that you have to shoot him.
So here we have two cases where laws against gun possession by minors had no effect. Laws against carrying concealed weapons without licenses, no effect. Licensing laws, gun registration, waiting periods, background checks, blah, blah, blah. Lack of education, character education in schools, lack of criminal records didn't have any effect on the outcome of these situations.
No, They had no effect whatsoever. And I look at these kinds of situations, and the only conclusion that I can come to is something has to change within the culture where young people are taught to value the lives of others, not see them as disposable if they get in their way. There has to be a change in the mindset within these communities where violence isn't the first thing that you jump to in order to solve a problem.
Well, and I worry that that's becoming a prevalent kind of that mindset is becoming prevalent more generally in the country when we're talking politics, where we see throughout the country these examples where violence is taking place just because you don't agree with someone. And the automatic reaction is, you're a bad person. You disagree with me, therefore I'm justified in harming you, punching you, kicking you, killing you. And
right.
So it's lest anyone try to call us a bunch of racists for focusing on these two examples from the black community. Let's not forget that this kind of violence we're seeing in the culture or in throughout society in general over the past 6 months, particularly.
And it's truly heartbreaking too to see the things that have happened in the recent months. The example of a Trump supporter being shot dead in the streets of, I think it was Seattle, he was shot to death by an Antifa supporter. So we have to get back to the point where life is valued. And really, from my perspective, we need to start doing that by valuing life at the point of conception.
Yes, all the way through. I think we've cheapened life from conception all the way through to natural death, to the point that now we're actually thinking and we have college professors suggesting it's okay to harm people who you disagree with. We've lost what made us great as Americans, where we could disagree with one another and not hate one another for that disagreement. And suddenly, right. It seems in the last, I think it's really ramped up in the age of Trump. I'm not blaming Trump here, but I think that's sort of what I'm saying is that since Trump's election, it just seems like that the disagreements have become even more inflammatory. And if we're ever going to come together, if we're going to prevent this country from coming apart at the seams, we've got to find a way to look at people on the other side of the aisle, politically on the other side of the racial divide, and listen to them. And even if we disagree, we don't hate them as a result. I don't know how do we change that?
I don't know if we can. We look at how the indoctrination starts within the education system, where young people are taught that it's acceptable to hate those who disagree with your opinions, unless there's a way to start at the very beginning with education and work our way up through the rest of society. I don't know what we can do.
There was a time when you could look to our civic leaders to be the voices of reason, and now all too often we hear our civic leaders, our politicians, the media, not being the voices of reason, but actually joining in and goading it on.
For example, you have people that are advocating for violence, and I hate to say it, but you had even the candidate for vice president for the Democrat Party who was talking about some of the violence that was happening, and she was flat out saying it shouldn't stop.
Right, and we have people like Michelle Obama suggesting that you young people need to keep up what you're doing. Well, what they're doing is burning the country down.
Yeah.
Our civic leaders and our politicians, and particularly the media, should be the adults in the room. They should be the ones and until we get to a point where those people, even if they disagree, can say, look, this is going too far, until we get to that point, and we hear this constant refrain of how President Trump supposedly refused to denounce white supremacy. Well, repeatedly we have the left refusing to denounce or even acknowledge that the violence exists on the left.
Well, not to mention the fact that much of the white supremacy that we see is actually coming from the left. It was Joe Biden who was endorsed by David Duke, not Donald Trump. It was Joe Biden who spoke very warmly at the funeral of an exalted cyclops of the KKK.
Robert Byrd.
Exactly. Talking about how he was a mentor and a friend, and Obama himself spoke at that funeral. And yet we have Donald Trump being told that, he is a racist and all this other stuff, and yet he has denounced time and time again David Duke, the man who endorsed Joe Biden. He has denounced time and time again neo-Nazis and the KKK and white supremacists. And yet the media keeps pushing this narrative.
Nothing's going to change until the elites, quote unquote, among us, the people that we look up to, we watch on television every day, we see standing up before microphones in Washington, D.C., in our state capitals, the people that we see reporting the news every night, until those people start to act like the adults and start to denounce the kind of violence, whether it's left violence or right violence or whatever, we're never going to get this thing figured out.
No. And it's sadly the greatest commodity right now, both within the media and within politics. The commodity is twofold. It's money and power. And unless there's a way to change the hearts of those within the media and within politics, especially politics on the left side of the spectrum, to see human life as that which is of the greatest value, I don't know where we're going as a country, to be honest.
Not to be too partisan on this, we see all too often on our side the celebration of the death of people that we disagree with politically or who are members of, let's take the Kyle Rittenhouse thing, which has, I don't know whether you've noticed, we've rustled plenty of jimmies since we did the Kenosha Kid episode. And one of the things that we pointed out was that, he was perfectly in his right to defend himself, but it's a tragedy that even these socialists and anarchists, their lives matter too. And and we shouldn't be celebrating the fact that he had to kill somebody in order to protect his own life. And all too often we see on our side people saying, yeah, look what he did. He's a hero. He killed 2 socialists. That's not the way we should be thinking about this. And that's part of the problem too.
No, it's not. And when we do that, when you revel in the death of those whom you consider your political enemies, you've stooped to the level of the radical left. So don't do it. Don't do it. We are better than that. And not only that, it's not just a matter of right versus left at that point. It's just a matter of what is morally right. It's not. We should never rejoice in the death of those who disagree with us. It's shameful if we do that. You can poke fun at the irony that a 17-year-old shot a pedophile to death, but again, we don't revel and rejoice in what could have been a preventable death.
It's one thing to laugh at the memes. It's another to celebrate the fact that those 2 people died.
Right.
Because the one thing that I'm afraid that we've lost sight of is the fact that everyone, no matter whether we agree with them or not politically, or whether we agree with them morally, whether they're Christians or non-Christians or atheists or whatever, pro-abortion, anti-gun, doesn't matter. Those people were created in God's image.
Yeah. And I don't know why this came to mind, but how many people would you see in some way or another being thankful that, if Shannon Watts, heaven forbid, got shot to death, she's an enemy of the Second Amendment. She's an enemy of our gun rights. But I have to ask myself, after what I've seen after the Rittenhouse incident, are there people that would be happy about that kind of thing? I would hope not.
I would hope not, but sadly, I believe they would. And it happens on the left and the right, and it's not right to play they did that first game, right? We often see, well, they did such and such. They laughed when Rand Paul got beaten up and had his ribs broken, or they laughed when Scalise got shot at the baseball game. So, we're not acting any different from them. Well, we should be acting different from them. It's sad that they're acting badly. We shouldn't be doing it too.
Exactly. And I think sadly a lot of this is just in some ways emotional retribution for the way that conservatives and Second Amendment supporters have been demonized by the left, to the point that we've become so numb to their vitriol that we in turn start to, in some ways, engage in the same kind of behavior that they do. It goes back to that old adage that two wrongs don't make a right. And I think the best thing for us to do as supporters of the Second Amendment is to intertwine our support for the Second Amendment with the right to life. Because that's really what it comes down to: the right to life, the right to defend our life, to defend the lives of others, even if it means it's at the expense of a criminal's life. But we can't stoop to the level of the left. We should be focused on the right to life as it is intertwined with our right to keep and bear arms.
Well, I had one more that I thought we would do today, and then another that I thought I'd save for the Reformation Gun Club, but this went a direction that I didn't anticipate, which is awesome. I think this has been a really good discussion, and I really appreciate, Pastor, you participating, and I'm glad that you're back. But we've got two more stories, one out of Oklahoma, and then, of course, naturally, wouldn't you know it, Florida Man makes an appearance on today's show, but if you want to hear about those stories, you'll have to join the Reformation Gun Club. Go to gunclub.armedlutheran.us, look for a link in the show notes, sign up for as little as $1 a month, and get access to this and hundreds of hours of exclusive content. Pastor, thank you so much for joining us, and it's fantastic to have you back. I'm so glad that you're doing better.
As always, it has been a joy.
And folks, if you have any questions or comments about what you heard here today, we encourage you to visit our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback. Leave us a voicemail or a voice message, or send us an email. We would love to hear from you and respond to you on the show in a future episode. Next week will be a variety show. Unfortunately, Pastor Bennett will not be with us, but he's got more important things that he's taking care of, including a trip to behind enemy lines to California to officiate a wedding. Pastor, safe travels, and we will talk to you in a couple of weeks. And folks, until we get together again, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback, or a review on iTunes, and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.